My name is Linda Parker, and I'm 66 years old. What I'm about to share changed my life forever. The day we buried my husband, Robert, was the quietest, emptiest day of my life. If you're listening to this, please like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. Standing there beside his grave, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize, and it froze me in place. It said, "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My hands shook as I typed back, "Who are you?" The answer almost knocked the air out of me. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." My heart split in two that moment. I looked over at David and Michael, my boys, standing near the casket with expressions that were just too calm. Their tears didn't feel real, and even their hugs were cold. Something was off, deeply off. For 42 years, Robert had been my partner, my safe place, my reason to keep going. I first met him when I was 24 in a tiny town called Willow Creek. We grew up on those same dusty backroads, chasing small dreams. I scrubbed houses to take care of my sick mom, while Robert kept his father's little bike shop running. We didn't have much, but we had what mattered most, real love. I'll never forget the first time he spoke to me. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was on my way to the market in my faded green dress and worn-out shoes. He walked out of his shop, grease still on his hands, and smiled at me with this shy look that melted me on the spot. "Good morning, Linda," he said softly. "Need me to check your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I made up some excuse just to keep talking to him. That silly excuse turned into walks under the old oak tree in Maple Square Park, then promises of forever, and finally, a simple wedding overflowing with hope. The early years weren't easy. We lived in a little two-bedroom house with a tin roof that leaked so badly we had pots everywhere when it rained. Still, we were happy. Robert worked from sunrise to sundown in his shop, and I sewed clothes for the women around town. When David was born, I thought my heart would burst with joy. He had Robert's big eyes and my smile. 2 years later, Michael came along, just as perfect. I gave those boys every ounce of love I had. Robert was a wonderful father, always taking them fishing on Sundays, teaching them how to use their hands, telling bedtime stories. For a long time, we were a real family. Or so I thought. But as the boys grew, things changed. David, the older one, was always ambitious. He used to ask why we lived so simply, why we didn't have a car like other families. And Michael, like always, followed his brother's lead. When David turned 18, Robert offered him a job at the shop. David turned it down flat. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." Robert never said much, but I could see the pain in his eyes as he sat on the porch at night, staring at the stars. His own son had rejected not just his work, but his way of life. Years rolled by, and to my surprise, David did make something of himself in the business world. He landed a job at a big real estate company in the city. Michael followed not long after. They started making money, more than Robert and I had ever dreamed of. At first, I was proud. My sons had done what we never could, escaping poverty. But pride soon turned into heartache. The visits grew fewer, the calls shorter. When they did show up, it was in shiny cars, expensive suits, and with talk only of deals and investments. They looked at us like we were something small, something embarrassing. "Mom," David told me once during one of his rare visits, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." And sure, he wasn't wrong. But that little house held every memory of our lives. The meals, the laughter, the tears, the years. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Robert, always wiser than me, would whisper, "Linda, money's changed them. We're not enough for them anymore." I tried not to believe it, kept making excuses for their absences and broken promises. But deep down, I knew he was right. The biggest shift came when David married Stephanie Whitman, a city woman who never tried to hide her disgust for our simple life. The first time she visited, she stepped out of the car in high heels that sank right into the dirt of our porch, wearing a red dress that cost more than everything I owned put together. "Nice to meet you," she said, with a tight little smile, barely touching my hand. Her eyes swept through our home like she was inspecting something beneath her. At dinner, she hardly ate a thing. Just pushed the food around her plate while David kept apologizing for everything. For me, for the house, for the life we lived. I overheard him whisper, "Next time, we'll just take them out to a restaurant." Each word cut through me like a knife. Michael stayed single but grew just as distant. His visits were only for holidays, and even then, he couldn't wait to leave. He was glued to his phone, closing deals while I tried to talk to him. Mom, I've gotta go. Big meeting tomorrow. That's all I got. Family Sundays faded into nothing. Christmas turned cold and staged. They'd bring us expensive gifts we didn't need, stay a couple hours, then leave relieved. Robert and I grew old quietly together, holding on to each other. His hands weren't as strong, my eyes weren't as sharp, but we got by with what little we earned. You know the saddest part, Linda? He said one night as we sat drinking coffee on the porch. It's not that they've got money. It's that money convinced them we don't matter anymore. He was right. They hadn't just changed their lives, they'd changed their hearts. We weren't parents to them anymore. We were a reminder of something they wanted to erase. When David bought a $200,000 house in a fancy neighborhood, and Michael bought a $150,000 condo, I felt the gap between us widen into a canyon. Stephanie showed up one rare time and said, "You should sell this place and move into a retirement community. There are some really nice ones for people your age." That word, community, stung like a slap. After 40 years of building a home, raising sons with all the love I had, they wanted to send us away like a burden. Robert straightened in his chair and said, with all his dignity, "We don't need that. We're fine right here." But I saw the looks on my sons' faces. They agreed with her. It got worse. David came one day with a stack of papers. "Mom, Dad," he said with that fake smile, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth maybe $1,000. If you sell it, I can pitch in so you can move somewhere better." He just didn't get it. For us, there was no place better than this house. Then he added, "Dad, you should retire from the shop. You're 70 now. It's time to rest." Robert looked at him with so much sadness. "Son, working isn't a burden. It's what keeps me alive." But Michael jumped in too, as he always did, saying, "But you could get hurt, Dad. At your age, an accident would be serious." Their words sounded caring, but I felt something else behind them, impatience, urgency, something I couldn't quite name. The months that followed were full of tension. The pressure from my sons to sell the house only grew stronger. They started bringing real estate agents over without telling us, even had the place appraised behind our backs. Then they began talking like they knew what was best for everyone. "Look," David said during one painfully awkward dinner, "Stephanie and I have decided we want kids soon, and we'll need help with expenses. If you sell the house and move somewhere smaller, that money could be an early inheritance." An early inheritance. He was asking for his share while we were still alive. The nerve of it left me speechless. Robert stayed calm, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Son," he said quietly, "when your mother and I pass, everything we have will be yours. But while we're alive, our choices are ours to make." "Don't be stubborn," Michael snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "You're old now. You can't keep living in the past." That night, after they left, Robert and I stayed up until dawn, talking about something we'd never dared say out loud before, the possibility that our sons weren't who we thought we had raised. With worry etched in his face, Robert whispered, "Something's wrong, Linda. This isn't just impatience or ambition. There's something darker behind all this pressure." He was more right than I ever knew. I couldn't imagine that my own children were plotting something that would shatter my life forever. The last ordinary conversation I had with David came 3 weeks before Robert's death. He showed up alone, without Stephanie, and he looked more serious than usual. Sitting at the kitchen table where he'd eaten countless breakfasts as a boy, he said, "Mom, I just want you to know, no matter what happens, Michael and I will always take care of you." At the time, those words comforted me. But later, standing beside Robert's grave, they haunted me. No matter what happens. What did he mean? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning. Robert had left early for the shop, just like he had for over 40 years. I was in the kitchen, making his favorite lunch, meatloaf with mashed potatoes, when the phone rang with a tone that froze my blood. "Mrs. Parker?" A voice I didn't recognize asked. "This is Memorial Hospital. Your husband's been in a serious accident. You need to come right away." The words smeared together in my mind like ink in water. My legs gave out, and I clutched the doorframe to keep from falling. "What happened?" Is he alive? Is he in the ICU? Ma'am, please hurry, the voice urged. My neighbor Betty had to drive me because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even hold the keys. The ride to the hospital was a blur of panic. Robert was always so careful, so precise. How could something like this happen? When we got there, David and Michael were already waiting. That startled me. No one had called them, at least not me. But in the haze of fear, I didn't dwell on it. Mom, David said, hugging me tightly, Dad's in rough shape. The doctors said one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and a brain injury. Michael's eyes were red, but there was something off in his face. He didn't look broken with grief. He looked restless, like he was waiting for news to break. I begged to see Robert, and the nurse explained, immediate family only, one at a time, 5 minutes max. When I stepped into that ICU room, my world cracked open. Robert was surrounded by machines, tubes, and bandages covering nearly all of him. I could barely recognize his face. The machines beeped steadily, keeping him alive. I reached for his hand, the only part left untouched, and whispered, Robert, my love, I'm here. You're going to make it through this, just like you always do. For a second, I felt the slightest squeeze. His eyelids moved, faintly. He was fighting. My strong, stubborn warrior was fighting to get back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I barely left the hospital, sleeping in stiff chairs in the waiting room. David and Michael stayed with me, but they seemed more focused on speaking with the doctors than sitting by their father. I overheard snatches of conversations I didn't understand at the time. Michael asking about insurance, David whispering on the phone about life policies and beneficiaries. On the second day, David said, Mom, we checked Dad's coverage. He's got a $50,000 life policy, and workers' comp could add up to $75,000 more. I stared at him in disbelief. Why are you talking about money? Your father is still alive. I just want him back. Of course, Mom, he replied, but I saw it in his eyes, a cold, calculating gleam that made my stomach turn. By the third day, the doctors called us into a small office. Dr. Thompson, a kind older man, looked at me with sorrow. Mrs. Parker, your husband's condition is critical. The burns are infected, and the head trauma is worse than we thought. We need to prepare for the worst. No, I whispered, even as I already knew. He went on gently. Robert is in a medically induced coma. We can keep him alive indefinitely, but it's unlikely he'll ever regain consciousness. 42 years of love, and now they were telling me it was slipping away. We'll do whatever it takes, I sobbed. No matter the cost. But David exchanged a look with Michael that chilled me. Mom, David said carefully, we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden? I snapped. He's your father. He's not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who gave you everything he had. Michael added, we just don't want you to drown in medical bills, Mom. They'll wipe out your savings. Always money. Even as my husband was fighting for his life, that was all they cared about. That night, I sat alone by Robert's bed, clutching his hand. My love, I whispered, I don't know what to do. They say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine life without you. And then, his fingers moved. Just a tiny squeeze, but real. His lips shifted, like he was trying to speak. I screamed for the nurses. He's reacting. He's trying to talk. But by the time they came, it was gone. The nurse shook her head. Sometimes it's just muscle spasms. It doesn't mean consciousness. But I knew better. Robert was trying to tell me something. Something urgent. 2 days later, early Friday morning, alarms blared. Lights flashed. Nurses rushed into his room. I had been dozing in the hall, and I ran screaming, No, no, no. They worked for 40 minutes, but at 4:37 a.m., Robert was gone. The pain was physical, ripping through me. I collapsed at his bedside, clutching his still warm body, begging him not to leave me. An hour later, David and Michael walked in, already carrying papers, documents, even funeral home contacts, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. We've already spoken with Willow Creek Funeral Home, David told me while I was still crying so hard I could barely breathe. They can pick up the body this morning. And I called the insurance, Michael added. The claim is already in motion. How could they be so quick, so organized, so cold, barely an hour after losing their father? Something felt wrong, seriously wrong, but my grief was so heavy I couldn't think straight. The funeral got set for Monday. David handled everything without really asking me. He picked the plainest casket, the shortest service, as if the whole thing needed to be rushed through and filed away. It's what Dad would have wanted, he said when I protested. Simple, no fuss. But Robert deserved more than this hurried attempt to bury him and move on. The day came, cloudy and cold, like the sky itself was mourning. I wore my one black dress, the same one from my mother's funeral, and my hands shook so badly that Betty had to fasten the tiny buttons for me. Be strong, Linda, my dear friend whispered, smoothing my hair. Robert would want you steady. I didn't feel steady. I felt hollow, like a shell without a soul. 42 years of marriage don't get laid to rest that easily. Everywhere I looked in the house, he was there, his coffee mug on the table, his tools on the porch, his pillow still holding his scent. At the cemetery, I was stunned by how few people had come. I expected more of Robert's co-workers from the shop, more neighbors, more familiar faces, but it was just David, Michael, Stephanie, Betty, me, and the pastor. For a man who had lived 70 years in the same town and helped so many people, it felt strangely empty. Where are the guys from the shop? I asked. We didn't want to bother anyone, David said quickly. Dad was private. He would have preferred something intimate. That wasn't true. Robert loved this community. He cared about people. He would have wanted them to say goodbye. Why had David made everything so secret, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons like I was outside my own body. David wore the right solemn face, but his eyes kept flicking to his watch. Michael couldn't stand still, like he had somewhere better to be. Stephanie, behind her black veil, checked her phone when she thought no one saw. This was their goodbye, impatience and distractions. The pastor talked about eternal life, about rest, about returning to God. The words floated past my shattered heart. I didn't want Robert to rest. I wanted him home, with me, growing old together, drinking coffee on the porch at dusk. When it was time to toss dirt onto the casket, my legs buckled. Betty had to hold me as I sobbed, and the dull thud of earth on would slam shut any hope I had left. Right then, standing at my husband's grave, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. My heart flatlined. The words swam, like I was losing my mind from grief. With shaking hands I typed, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. The phone slipped from my fingers like it burned. Betty bent to pick it up, but I stopped her, fast. I couldn't let anyone see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. You okay, Mom? David asked, walking over with a worried face. I stared at him, searching for something. His eyes looked sincere, but suddenly every gesture, every word, felt suspicious. I'm fine, I lied, tucking the phone into my purse. I just need to go home. On the drive back, the messages looped in my head. Was someone playing the cruelest joke at the worst moment of my life? Or, was there even a chance Robert was alive? If he was, who had we buried? And if he wasn't, who knew our life so well that they could text something so specific about my sons? That night, in a house that felt like a tomb, I replayed every detail of the last few days. The accident had been strange from the start. According to David, a machine exploded at the shop, but Robert knew every screw and wire in that place. He was obsessive about safety. And how did my sons get to the hospital so fast if no one had called them? The hospital had called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know before I did? And then, the money. From day one, David and Michael talked about policies and beneficiaries, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. I went to Robert's old wooden desk and pulled out the metal box with our important papers. Insurance policies, house deed, shop documents, all of it. I found the $50,000 life insurance David mentioned. But there was a detail I didn't remember. The policy had been updated 6 months ago, bumped from $5,000 to $50,000. Why? Robert never told me. And who pushed for it? I kept digging and found something worse, a workers' comp policy I'd never seen, bought just 2 months before his death. It listed 5,000 for accidental death on the job, with a 15,000 total cap. For a family like ours, that was real money, and a tempting target for someone without a conscience. My phone buzzed again. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time, I didn't hesitate. Whoever this was, they knew too much to be a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details only someone close would know. The next morning, I went to the bank where we'd kept our accounts for 30 years. Mrs. Caldwell, the branch manager who'd known us forever, met me with honest sympathy. Linda, I'm so sorry about Robert. He was a good man. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, I said, steadying my voice. I need to review our accounts. I have to understand what's going on. She printed the last 6 months of statements. What I saw froze me. 3 months in a row, large cash withdrawals. 1,000 in January, 3,000 in February, 4,000 in March. Money I never knew was taken. Who authorized these? I asked, my voice shaking. Your husband in person, she said gently. He said it was for shop repairs. But I kept the household books. I knew every bill. Robert never mentioned major repairs, and we never talked about draining our savings. Do you have the signed slips? I asked. She handed me the receipts. The signature looked like Robert's, but the handwriting was off, too shaky, too unsure for his usual firm script. Did he come alone? I asked, heart pounding, or was someone with him? She thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, I believe one of your sons came along once or twice. David, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork because Robert had trouble reading without his glasses. David. My own son, tied to withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Robert saw perfectly with his glasses, which he never took off in the daytime. That afternoon, while I stared at the receipts for the 100th time, another message came. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Robert he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I couldn't deny the pattern any longer. The sudden policy increases, the secret withdrawals, David's name on transactions I'd never heard of, his icy efficiency with the funeral, the chill in his eyes while his father lay dying. The question that haunted me, that chilled me to the bone, was whether my own sons had really planned Robert's death. How they had done it. And most of all, who was sending me these messages, someone who seemed to know every hidden detail. The days that followed were pure torment. Every smile from David, every hug from Michael, every word of comfort felt like a mask hiding something dark. Still, I needed proof before I could accept something so unthinkable. The texts kept coming. Go to Robert's shop. Check his desk. You miss things. So I forced myself to go back to the shop for the first time since the so-called accident. David had told me a machine exploded. But what I found looked nothing like the aftermath of an explosion. The place was spotless. Too spotless. No burn marks on the walls, no broken parts, no debris, nothing that could explain what supposedly happened. Where's the machine that blew up? I whispered. Every tool was in its place. The welder, the compressor, the saw. All intact. So what had really happened? At his desk, I found a note in Robert's handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. David keeps insisting I need more insurance. Says it's for Linda. But it doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. Underneath was another note. Michael brought me papers to sign. Said it was to modernize the shop. I don't understand the rush. My husband had sensed it. He had felt what I refused to see, the evil growing inside our own sons. Then I found an envelope with my name written on it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter from Robert. My dearest Linda, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I've noticed strange changes in David and Michael. They're too focused on money, on insurance, on selling the house. Stephanie is pushing them hard. Yesterday, David told me I should think about my safety, because at my age, any accident could be fatal. It sounded less like advice and more like a warning. I love you, Linda. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. The letter slipped from my fingers. He had known. He had tried to warn me, but I hadn't wanted to see it. That night, David showed up with a bottle of wine and a smile that now looked completely false. Mom, I've been thinking about your future, he said, pouring himself a glass without even asking if I wanted one. The insurance money is already processing. It'll be 15,000. How do you know the exact amount? I asked, feigning innocence. Well, I helped Dad with the paperwork. He wanted you taken care of. A lie. Robert never wanted to increase his coverage. His own notes said David pressured him. And what do you think I should do with that money? I asked carefully. His eyes flashed with something greedy. You could buy a smaller, cozier house. Or better yet, a retirement community with company and medical care. Michael and I could manage your money, make it last. We know about investments. We could triple it. Triple it, or steal it. Let me think about it, I said, stalling. Of course, Stephanie chimed in sweetly. But not too long. For your own good. After they left, I sat in the kitchen shaking with rage and fear. My sons, my flesh and blood, had not only killed their father, but now they wanted everything he left me. That night, another long message arrived. Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Robert's accident. There are contradictions you need to know. The next morning, I went to the station. Sergeant O'Connor, who'd known Robert for years, looked puzzled when I asked. The report on your husband's accident, he repeated. What accident, Mrs. Parker? The shop explosion, I said, my throat tightening. He checked his files and shook his head. We don't have any report of an explosion. In fact, we have no record of a work accident involving Robert at all. According to the medical file, he was brought to the hospital unconscious, with signs of poisoning. Poisoning? I whispered. Yes. Traces of methanol in his blood. Enough to cause blindness, brain damage, even death. The hospital should have told you. But no one had. Instead, they had hidden the truth. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, trembling. The immediate family signed papers requesting confidentiality, the sergeant said gently. They said you were too fragile to handle the details. Immediate family. David and Michael. They had invented the explosion, covered up the poisoning, and tricked me into believing it was an accident. Mrs. Parker, O'Connor added, if you suspect foul play, we can open a formal investigation. I didn't just suspect. I was certain. My sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Michael arrived with flowers and the same practiced smile as his brother. How are you, Mom? You look tired. I'm fine, I lied, watching him closely. That's good. David and I think you should sell the house soon, while the market's hot. Why the rush? I asked. Well, old houses lose value. And you need liquidity for funeral costs, medical bills. Lies. The funeral was dirt cheap, and the insurance had covered the hospital. Michael, I said, locking eyes with him, you know your dad didn't die from a work accident. For a split second, panic flashed across his face before he forced it away. What are you talking about, Mom? I went to the police. There's no record of an explosion. This time, the panic stayed longer. Mom, you shouldn't do things like that. You'll just get confused. The grief is clouding your judgment. The grief, or your lies? I shot back. He stood up suddenly, spilling the coffee I'd poured. You need rest. We'll talk later. He rushed out, making a tense call on the porch. I couldn't hear the words, but the urgency was clear. That night, another message arrived. Tomorrow they'll come together. They'll try to convince you you're losing your mind. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they give you. The warning came true. The next day, David and Michael arrived together, with Stephanie. They wore exaggerated looks of concern and carried a bag of pastries from the bakery downtown. Mom, we're worried, David said in a syrupy voice. The neighbors say you've been acting strange. Betty says you're talking to yourself, that you're not eating. Another lie. Betty never said that. Stephanie brought your favorite pastries, Michael added, holding out the bag. And we made special coffee, the brand you like. I remembered the message. Don't take anything. Were they planning to poison me too, the way they did Robert? Thanks, I said calmly, but I already had breakfast. But Mom, Stephanie insisted, her smile stretched thin. You need to eat properly, Mom. You've lost so much weight since Dad passed, David said. I'm fine, I answered firmly, though my hands trembled under the table. David exchanged a look with Michael, the same secretive look they'd shared at the hospital when the doctor gave us Robert's prognosis. Mom, David went on, scooting closer, we want to talk about something important. Michael and I have consulted some doctors about your recent behavior. My behavior? I asked, stunned. Yes. The odd questions, your trip to the police, your obsession with irrelevant details about Dad. It's normal after a loss this big, but it can become dangerous if it's not treated. Michael nodded solemnly. We spoke to Dr. Whitman. He says it's common for older women to develop paranoia after losing a partner. Paranoia. My own sons were painting me as crazy, just because I was digging into their lies. I'm not paranoid, I said, steadying my voice. I'm asking the questions I should have asked from the start. What questions? David challenged me. Like why there's no police report for your father's so-called accident. Why the shop is spotless if there was an explosion. Why you withdrew $5,000 from our account without telling me. Silence slammed into the room. They glanced at one another with thinly veiled panic. Mom, Michael finally said, there are simple explanations. Dad took out that money for repairs. He wanted it to be a surprise. A surprise? Yes, David jumped in quickly. He hired workers to fix the roof, repaint the walls. For your birthday. If that were true, where were the workers? Where were the supplies? And why did no one in town know a thing about it? As for the police report, David added, not every accident requires one. Especially when it happens on private property. More lies. Sergeant O'Connor had been crystal clear, any serious workplace injury requires an official report. Mom, Stephanie cut in with a sugary smile, we just want to take care of you. That's why we think you should move somewhere with specialized care. A home, David corrected softly. A place for people coping with complicated grief. They'd have doctors, nurses, activities. And in the meantime, Michael added, we can handle selling the house, managing the insurance money. All the things you shouldn't have to worry about in your condition. There it was. The plan laid bare, declare me incompetent, ship me to a home, and take everything Robert and I built. And if I refuse? I asked. Why would you refuse? David smiled, but it sent a chill down my spine. Because this is my house. This is where I built a life with Robert. This is where I raised you. Mom, Michael sighed, exaggerated. You can't live in the past. Dad is gone. You need to accept it. I've accepted it, I shot back, but that doesn't mean I'll give up my home or my money. Their masks slipped. David stood abruptly. All right. If you won't listen, we'll take more drastic measures. What does that mean? I asked, heart pounding. It means we can start a legal process to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your behavior. We already have doctors who say you're suffering from paranoia. Doctors? What doctors? No one has examined me. Dr. Whitman already signed a preliminary report, Michael said smoothly. Based on our descriptions, you need specialized care. A report signed by a doctor who had never even spoken to me, bought and paid for by my own sons. So, Mom, David concluded, you can cooperate, or we'll do it legally. Either way, you're going to get the help you need. It was a direct threat. Hand over my money voluntarily, or they'd use the system to strip it from me. I need time to think, I said, forcing calm. Of course, Stephanie said with her false sweetness. But not too long. For your own good. After they left, I sat in the kitchen trembling with rage and fear. My own flesh and blood. Not only had they killed Robert, but now they were plotting to destroy what little I had left. That night, my phone buzzed again, this time with a long message. Linda, this is Stephen Callahan, a private investigator. Robert hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected David and Michael. They poisoned him with methanol in his coffee. I have recordings of their conversations. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., meet me at the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll be there. At last, I knew who had been sending the warnings. More importantly, I would finally have proof. But time was running out. David and Michael had shown their hand. If I didn't act soon, they'd lock me away and bleed Robert's sacrifice dry. The war had begun. I might be a 66-year-old widow against two ruthless men, but I had something they didn't. The truth. And truth always finds its way out. That night, for the first time since Robert's death, I allowed myself a small smile. My husband hadn't died in vain. His instinct, his decision to hire a private investigator, would bring justice. David and Michael had underestimated me. They were about to learn that a woman fighting for her murdered husband's memory is stronger than their greed could ever be. The next day came heavy with nerves. I dressed carefully, choosing my deep purple dress, the one I wore when things truly mattered. At 2:30, I walked toward the corner cafe, each step measured, each shadow feeling dangerous. The paranoia they accused me of, it didn't seem so crazy now. The cafe was busy, chatter buzzing around me. I went straight to the back table and ordered chamomile tea. My hands shook against the wood. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall man in his 50s approached, gray hair, sharp eyes, a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked softly. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm sorry for your loss. Robert was a good man." He sat across from me, setting the folder down. "Before I show you, you should know, what you'll hear will hurt." "I've been ready since your first message," I said, with a strength that surprised me. He opened the folder and placed a small recorder on the table. "Robert came to me a month ago. He was worried about his sons. He hired me to investigate quietly." He pressed play. Robert's voice, my Robert's voice, filled the air. "Stephen, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. David and Michael are pressuring me to increase my insurance. Yesterday, David brought papers he said were to protect Linda, but when I read them, they had clauses benefiting him and his brother. My pulse raced. Hearing him again was like having him back, and yet, every word was proof of betrayal. The recording continued. "Michael keeps asking strange questions. What time I eat breakfast, what I eat, what time Linda comes to the shop. He says it's out of concern, but the way he asks makes me uneasy." Stephen paused. "That was 3 weeks before Robert's death. But I have something newer." He pressed play again. This time it was David's voice, low but sharp. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is getting suspicious. Yesterday he asked why I'm so focused on his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It works perfectly," David's voice said on the recording. "The symptoms look like a heart attack or a stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so devastated we can do whatever we want with her." Tears slid down my cheeks. It was my son, my own flesh and blood, coolly planning his father's murder. "There's more," Stephen murmured, and cued another file. "This one is from the day before Robert died." Michael's voice came through, flat and businesslike. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow, David's putting the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin supplement a doctor recommended. The idiot will drink it without a second thought. First dizziness and confusion, then vision loss, seizures, coma. The doctors will call it a stroke or heart attack. By the time anyone figures out it's poisoning, it'll be too late." The bottom dropped out of my world. They hadn't just plotted Robert's death, they carried it out with a cold calculation that terrified me. How could the babies I nursed, the boys I comforted through nightmares, turn into men this monstrous? "How did you get these?" I managed, choking on my sobs. "Robert asked me to place listening devices," Stephen said. He was scared, but didn't know of what, exactly. "We tapped the home phone and a few strategic spots." He set photos on the table. "I also have David buying methanol at a hardware store about 30 minutes outside town. Paid cash, fake name, but I've got video." The pictures showed David leaving the store, a small bottle in his hand. The date stamp was 5 days before Robert's death. "And this," Stephen added, sliding over more documents, "is their financials for the past 6 months. The spending doesn't match their income. David owes $70,000 to a city lender. Michael's got $40,000 in gambling debt. They were desperate." It clicked. This wasn't just greed, it was panic. They were drowning and saw their father as fast cash. "Why didn't you go straight to the police after Robert died?" I asked. "Because they were a step ahead," Stephen said grimly. "They bribed the attending doctor to change the official cause. Instead of poisoning, the The certificate says heart failure from a workplace accident. Without proper medical evidence, these recordings might not secure a conviction. But now we have a full picture, I said, my grief sharpening into resolve. Exactly. One more thing, he warned. My blood went cold. What? Your sons were planning to kill you too. He pressed play again. David and Michael, together this time. Once we get Dad's insurance, David said, we need to get rid of Mom. We can't risk her getting suspicious. How? Michael asked. Same method, David said. But we'll make it look like a suicide, a widow who can't live without her husband. No one will question it. We're the only heirs. We'll take everything, the house, the savings, the insurance. Close to 200,000 total. The audio cut off. I shook uncontrollably. My sons had murdered their father and planned to murder me, for money. Mrs. Parker, Stephen said gently, we can make them pay. We have enough. What do we do now? I asked, wiping my face. First, the police. Sergeant O'Connor is straight. He's not part of any corruption. Second, we move fast. Your sons are trying to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. I intercepted a call this morning. They're meeting Judge Miller at 10 a.m. to start the process. I stood, steadier than I'd felt in weeks. Then we act tonight. Agreed, Stephen said. But look at this last piece. He slid over a photo of Robert leaving a clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, he got a full exam in the city. Results show perfect health, normal blood pressure, no heart disease. That confirms it. Poisoning, not natural causes. That was the final puzzle piece. Robert had been healthy, and killed by his sons. I squeezed Stephen's hand. Thank you for keeping your promise to him. Now, let's get justice. That night, we went straight to the station. It was 8 p.m., quiet, and Sergeant O'Connor was on the desk. Sergeant, I said, voice steady, I need to report the murder of my husband, Robert Parker. His brows shot up. Murder? Mrs. Parker? The certificate says heart complications after a workplace accident. The certificate is false, I said, setting Stephen's folder on his desk. My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our sons. For 2 hours we laid it out, the recordings, the photos of David buying methanol, the bank withdrawals, the clinic report proving Robert's good health, and the audio where my boys mapped out both murders, their father's and mine. With each clip, the sergeant's face hardened. This is monstrous, he muttered at last. Mrs. Parker, once we arrest them, there's no going back. Are you sure? Sergeant, I said, lifting my chin. Those men murdered my husband for money and planned to kill me. They're not my sons anymore. They're criminals. We'll need the medical examiner to exhume Robert's body and confirm methanol, he said. Can you handle that? Do whatever it takes. He called the district attorney, who came in despite the hour. After reviewing the evidence, the DA authorized arrest warrants on the spot. We move at dawn, he said. We can't give them time to destroy anything. Stephen walked me home. Will you be okay alone? I will, I answered. I'm done being afraid. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with Robert's photos, and for the first time since he died, I felt something besides pain, a fierce, quiet satisfaction that justice was coming. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. David. Mom, you need to come to Michael's place right now. Something terrible happened. What happened? I asked, feigning concern. I'll explain in person. Please. Hurry. I knew it was a trap. After last night's recordings, they were accelerating their plan. But the police were already moving. I'm on my way, I lied. I stayed put. At 7:30, I watched from my window as multiple squad cars split down the road toward both of my sons' homes. My phone rang over and over, first David, then Michael, their voices turning frantic on voicemail, but I didn't answer. At 9, there was a knock. Sergeant O'Connor stood on my porch. Mrs. Parker, we've arrested David and Michael. They're in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. I closed my eyes and finally let out the breath I'd been holding since the day Robert died. My legs shook, not from fear this time, but from relief. How did they react? I asked. Stephen told me David denied everything until the recordings played, then broke down. Michael tried to run, chased 6 blocks before they caught him. That afternoon Stephanie showed up crying, begging me to drop charges. It's my fault I pushed him, she sobbed. I stared at her coldly. Your husband poisoned mine. He plotted to kill me, too. There's no excuse. Please leave. 3 days later Robert's body was exhumed. Tests confirmed Stephen's findings, lethal methanol. The town was stunned. 2 sons murdering their father became the biggest case anyone could remember. Investigators uncovered the truth. David owed 70 grand to shady lenders, Michael had 40,000 in gambling debts, and they'd bribed a doctor $5,000 to falsify the death certificate. He was arrested too. Stephen explained Robert had suspected danger. That's why he'd hired him, to watch, record, protect me if needed. Even in his last days, Robert had been shielding me. 2 months later the trial began. Reporters, neighbors, strangers filled the courtroom. I wore black, mourning but proud. Stephen sat by me, steadying me. When David and Michael shuffled in, chained and dressed in orange, my heart broke again, but pity was gone. The prosecutor laid out every piece. The recordings, the bank withdrawals, the methanol tests. The courtroom gasped hearing my sons' voices plot Robert's murder, and then mine. When I testified, I said what hurt most. I thought I raised them with love, never imagining they'd use that trust to kill. The defense argued desperation, debts, outside influence. But the recordings didn't lie. The medical examiner confirmed Robert had been perfectly healthy before poison destroyed him. After 3 days the prosecutor's closing cut deep. These aren't victims. They're predators who saw parents as obstacles. The jury deliberated 6 hours. The verdict: guilty of murdering Robert Parker. Guilty of conspiring to murder me. The courtroom erupted. David collapsed in his chair. Michael sat rigid, expressionless. My sons were gone forever, not lost, but condemned by their own cruelty. The judge sentenced David and Michael to life in prison, no parole for 30 years. A heavy weight lifted from me, justice for Robert at last. Friends hugged me after court. Betty whispered, now he can rest. Back home, the house felt different, mine again. A week later, Stephen asked how I felt. At peace, I told him. I donated the life insurance to a foundation for victims of family crimes. That money was stained with blood. 6 months later, a letter came from David. He wrote of regret, debts, and shame. He ended with, tomorrow I'll end my life. He kept his word. Michael broke down after his brother's suicide and was sent to a prison hospital, lost in paranoia and guilt. 2 years passed. I turned Robert's shop into a flower garden, carrying roses and sunflowers to his grave every Sunday. Stephen visits often. He's become family. The neighbors sometimes ask if I miss my sons. I miss the boys they once were, not the men they became. The Ernest Parker Foundation grew, helping families like mine. I met a woman who proved her brother murdered their mother. She hugged me, crying, "You gave me courage." Moments like that make the pain worth it. Springfield Creek never forgot the case. Some call me a hero, others cruel, but I know the truth. My health is steady now. Peace has healed me more than any medicine. On Sundays I tell Robert everything, about the foundation, about the families we help. I feel his pride in the wind. 5 years later, I am 71, with white hair and calm eyes. At the anniversary ceremony, over 200 people came. Stephen spoke. Robert Parker died because of greed, but his legacy lives on in the courage of his wife. And I finally understood, even in tragedy, love and truth can grow into something greater than death. Evil tried to erase Robert's story, but good turned it into hope for others. Sometimes at night, I look at old photos of David and Michael as children, laughing, hugging their father, playing in the yard. I cry for those boys, but not for the men they became. They chose their path. My life grew beyond tragedy. It became proof that truth outlives lies, that love is stronger than betrayal, and that it's never too late to seek justice. Tomorrow Stephen will come for coffee, as he always does. I'll bake his favorite pastry, share the thank you letters from families we've helped, and then we'll work in the garden planting for spring. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments.